Cinema and Fetishism, or, The Commercial Value of Shit. March 1, 2011 /Cengiz Erdem. Even shit has a commercial value, depending of course, on whose shit it is. While in the case of human shit you have to pay to get rid of it, in the case of animal shit it is said to be a very efficient and sufficient fertilizer for one who has learned to use it, rather than seeing it as something worthless because it cannot be eaten. Inversely, it is this very terror that is projected onto the spectacle of the mother's body, and invites the reading of an absence where anatomy sees a different conformation. 1. Since even the instincts are produced by the suprapanoptic projection-introjection mechanism in which the subject finds himself/herself, giving free rein to the unconscious to express itself only produces projections of the evil within onto the without. For Freud, the death drive is the effect of a striving for infinity, nothingness, and death. I would say it is also the cause of it. Commodity fetishism is equal to will to nothingness in that it is the desire for the inorganic objects to stand in for nothingness, the real of the subject's desire. Capitalism replaces the use value of the objects with two-dimensional commercial value, so the subject desires to be desired, and he/she can only do that by adapting to the two-dimensional sphere of commodity fetishism, by becoming a fetish object himself. If we recall Marcuse complaining that the one-dimensional is absorbing the two-dimensional, and also keep in mind that Marcuse's two-dimensional culture has become the predominant culture of today, we can see why the solution is to say, I don't see myself as you see me, to the big other in whatever form it appears in our lives. In our opinion, fetishism only occurs in sadism in a secondary and distorted sense. It is divested of its essential relation to disavowal and suspense and passes into the totally different context of negativity and negation, where it becomes an agent in the sadistic process of condensation too. So the death drive produces new objects of desire by splitting the already existing objects. The subject as death drive, by splitting the symbolic, opens up spaces for the emergence of new objects of desire to stand in for nothingness and death. The good object has moved to the side of knowledge and the cinema becomes a bad object, a dual displacement which makes it easy for science to stand back. The cinema is persecuted, but this persistence is also a reparation. The knowing posture is both aggressive and depressive, reparation of a specific kind, peculiar to the semiologist, the restoration to the theoretical body of what has been taken from the institution, from the code which is being studied. 3. Writing about cinema is essentially a criticism of the symbolic order, for both writing and cinematic production are themselves symbolic social activities. Since cinema exploits the life drive by satisfying the desire for something covering nothing, writing about cinema is essentially governed by the death drive which tries to expose the nothingness behind the symbolic. That which a film veils is nothing other than nothing, and exposing this nothingness behind the film introduces a split between the subject and the signifier. When looked at like that, psychotherapy becomes critical of the existing social order, for by criticizing the film the critic heals the film industry, hence having a healing effect on the spectator. It is clear that fetishism, in the cinema as elsewhere, is closely linked to the good object. The function of the fetish is to restore the latter, threatened in its goodness, in Melanie Klein's sense, by the terrifying discovery of the lack. Thanks to the fetish, which covers the wound and itself becomes erotogenic, the object as a whole can become desirable again without excessive fear for. According to Metz, cinema is a fetish object. Films stand in for an object that is absent. The reflection of images on the screen veil the nothingness behind them without which they would not have been seen. The fetish is the cinema in its physical state. A fetish is always material. Insofar as one can make up for it by the power of the symbolic alone, one is precisely no longer a fetishist. 5. Cinema produces unattainable objects of desire. By filling in a gap they render the nothingness more unattainable. They give the impression that there is something they are hiding, and that way they produce the desire for nothingness. Cinema's power of exploiting the will to nothingness, however, is the only tool one has at hand to criticize the cinematic apparatus as a form of ideology. Sublimation of the objects of desire takes place through cinema and television. The more they are rendered unattainable, the more sublime they become. What cinema does is to create the illusion of presence. Cinema shows an absent object through presenting an object to substitute for the nothingness. So it is the presence of an absence that we see on the screen. To enjoy cinema, the subject has to know that what he/she is watching is only a presence covering an absence, that it is that which stands in for the real of the subject's desire. So Metz can say, the fetish is the cinema in its physical sense. 6. Looked at that way, fetish is that which is produced to stand in for the real object of desire, which is nothingness, and is therefore produced to satisfy the will to nothingness. Cinematic narrative doesn't show events in their real sequence. There are cuts, gaps, spaces between the scenes. All those cuts, gaps, spaces between the scenes are openings to an external reality. They give the impression that there is something external to that which is actually being shown. The spectator is made to believe that there is something he/she doesn't know as to what's really going on in the film. This curiosity for that which is unknown inherent in every human is that which cinema exploits. By making the spectator simultaneously believe and not believe what he/she is seeing on the screen, cinema creates an ambiguous relationship with itself and the spectator. By leaving gaps within the narrative, cinema invites projective identification. The spectator projects what he has inside him onto the absence within the filmic text. He fills those gaps with his internal partial objects and imposes a unity and continuity on the split narrative of the film. The death drive involves splitting and introjection. The subject as death drive splits given unities and continuities. It is impossible for a spectator governed by the death drive to identify with the characters in the film. On the contrary, he desires nothing, identifies with nothing, without which he knows there can be no meaning. Rather than filling in the gaps within the narrative, death drive puts them into the spotlight. It shows that those gaps are interior to the narrative itself. The incompleteness of the narrative is the condition of possibility for its meaning. We can differentiate these two different types of spectatorship, one governed by the life drive and the other by the death drive, as associationism and dissociationism. In associationism, the subject immerses himself/herself in the medium of the imaginary and identifies with the characters in the movie. In dissociationism, the subject introduces new splits between the internal and the external objects and hence renders identification impossible for himself/herself. The life drive is the will to become one with the world. It is the force behind mimicry and associationism. It is wrong to associate the death drive with mimicry and associationism. The subject as death drive dissociates and splits given unities and continuities. In horror movies, the absence of the knowledge of truth for the spectator, that is, not being given the role of the omniscient I, the spectator becomes curious and to understand what's really going on in the movie he/she identifies with the characters. In the face of the abundance of gaps to be filled in the process of watching the film, the life drive grows less and less strong for doing all the job throughout the watching process, while the death drive is oppressed, and because of this very oppression it grows more and more strong. Eventually the life drive collapses and the death drive overflows the auditorium. Although it is itself a product of the death drive, horror film exploits the life drive, that is, the spectator's will to form unities, bind the action, desire to get rid of all gaps and inconsistencies within the narrative. The death drive negates negation and reaches the highest possible degree of affirmation. Thanatos wills nothing, whereas Eros wills nothingness. We can see that the Thanatos case is the reverse of what Nietzsche says: man would much rather will nothingness than not will. Eros wants to want nothing, and strives to form such unities that everything will fit in its place, the system will lack nothing, so Eros will want nothing. Thanatos introduces splits, and tries to reach the nothingness behind the symbolic. Thanatos wants nothing rather than nothingness. He wants nothing to show the nothingness in the midst of everything, that there is nothing behind all that there is. While Eros wants to lack nothing, wants the lack of lack, Thanatos affirms life as it is and wants lack, wants something to lack, wants that lack to remain after all is said and done, so that he can desire the nothingness which that lack presents. Thanatos doesn't want something to replace nothing, but rather wants the lack in everything. By negating negation, the death drive affirms life as it is, that is, in its incompleteness, and with nothingness and death in its midst. 1 Christian Metz, the imaginary signifier, Psychoanalysis and Cinema, Trends. Celia Britton and Will Williams, Ben Brewster and Alfred Guzdi, London, Macmillan, 1982, 69. 2 Gilles Deleuze, Coldness and Cruelty, Trans. Jean McNeill, New York, Zone, 1989, 32. 3 Metz, 80. 4 Metz, 75. 5 Metz, 75. 6 Metz, 75. Related articles. Advertisements. Report this AD. Report this AD. Share this. Post navigation. 4 thoughts on cinema and fetishism, or, the commercial value of shit. Your article is very interesting, with some philosophy in the end which I couldn't really follow. You have a very interesting blog. Congratulations. I invite you to visit my blogs Transient and Pos del Norte and Impedimenta. Best regards from Barcelona. Ping back, the Deleuzian notion of the image, slicing the world, or cinema beyond the human, via networkologies, minimal ve maximal Yasler. Ping back, projective identification and introjection minimal ve maximal Yasler. Leave a reply. Black Club Minimalist Ontologue. Cengiz Erdem. Black Club Emergent Sense Matters. Alienations. Post-nihilism. Links. Archives. Categories. Categories. Entities. Alain Badiou. Cengiz Erdem. Gilles Deleuze. Philosophy. Slavahique. Speculative realism. Advertisements. Report this AD. Black Club Minimalist Ontologue. Pages/Safeler. Numina. The Book of Nihil. Black Club Retrospector. Black Club Introspector. Black Club Translator. Black Club Emergent Sense Matters. Sense Logic. A Brief Note on Kant. 0 RPHA and Drift Archive. The Imminence of Truths Alain Badiou. Hyperstition, Altering the Supposedly Predestined Future, or, Utopia as Method, Structure, and Process. Dialectics of Time and Event from Kant and Hegel to Deleuze and Badiou. Cronenberg, Burroughs, Deleuze, 2, The Evil Spirit and the Spiritual Automaton. 3 Modalities of the Immanent Infinitude, Life, Matter, and Thought in Henry, Deleuze and Badiou. Post-nihilistic Speculations, The Ontology of Non-Being. Black Club Senspector. Mediate the Emerging Mediator. Black Club Speculations. Black Club Immanent Entities. Letterbox. It's not the number that matters.